Hi, I'm Vernā Myers, or as some of you fondly refer to me as, the Diversity Lady. Welcome to Sundays with Vernā podcast. I'm your host, Vernā Myers. Join me as I talk with the brightest minds in science and art and culture and politics to explore new perspectives, cultivate healing, and bridge divides across differences. I have fascinating conversations with people from all over the world, and I'm sharing these conversations here to inspire and to remind people how we are all connected. So catch new episodes every third Sunday of the month, and thanks for spending time with me today. If you enjoy my podcast, subscribe, rate, and review the show, and share it with your network. Now, let's jump right in. Hello and welcome to Sundays with Vernā. Our podcast was actually created in the wake of Black Lives Matter movement to bring together the brightest minds in culture and science and business and politics and benefits to have candid conversations that bridge divides and amplify awareness. And I'm your host, Vernā Myers, and I'm so glad you've joined us today because we are going to do a wonderful show, and I'm so happy to introduce Rodney Bolden and the importance of employee benefits in promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. So let me tell you a little bit about Rodney before we hear from him. He is the Executive Director of Industry Engagement and Learning for Morgan Stanley at Work. Rodney works with various industry organizations to develop and present thought leadership research on current trends in workplace financial benefits. Additionally, Rodney hosts the Morgan Stanley at Work podcast, Invested at Work podcast, and is the chairperson of the Employee Benefit Research Institute's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. Rodney has served as a financial education consultant for municipal entities like the New York City Housing Authority, the New York City Office of Financial Empowerment, Ulster County Office of Employment and Training, and the Orange County Youth Bureau on formulating financial literacy materials for their respective constituencies. He's also worked with community-based organizations to provide advice and direction on implementing a comprehensive financial literacy curriculum. So welcome to Sundays with Vernā.
Thank you, Vernā. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
We are so grateful to have you talk about something so important to us. But before we get into the details of like employee benefits and financial literacy, I wanted you just to tell us, you've got a very interesting title. So can you tell us more about what you do as Morgan Stanley at Work and your head of industry engagement and learning?
Yeah, it's a new role that was created last year. And really what I do is similar to what you talked about, taking a look at what are the current and evolving trends in workplace benefits. So we conduct research internally, but we also partner with organizations like the Employee Benefit Research Institute, which is a think tank out of Washington, D.C. They're the premier employee benefit research entity. The Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, as well. We've done surveys with them, and a financial health network. So the list goes on and on. So my role is to sit down and say, okay, what do we want to study? What do we want to learn? What don't we know when it comes to workplace benefits? Because my division at Morgan Stanley is our workplace wealth division, Morgan Stanley at Work. So it's comprised of our equity compensation solutions, our donor advised fund solutions, a non-qualified deferred comp, whole host of items really dealing with building wealth for employees. So that's what I do. And then I go out and talk like you. I go out and talk about what are the findings at various industry conferences and events.
Yeah, we were so happy to discover you. I think you were speaking at the United Nations with AARP. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. So AARP, Morgan Stanley at Work, is a member of an initiative at AARP. It's AARP, OECD, and the World Economic Forum. It's called the Living, Learning, and Earning Longer Curriculum. It's over, I think now we're up to 120 global companies focused on work longevity. So realizing that we have an aging population. Within the next 25 years, a third of the world's population is going to be over the age of 50. Birth rates have declined and people living longer. As people live longer, they're going to be working certainly longer. I was asked to talk about that at the UN because what we find globally is that, of course, here we have a very mature population or maturing population. Other countries like Japan, certainly, but in some of the developing nations like Africa, they have a relatively young population, but they're expected to be in the same boat within the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about, okay, how do you, we're here now. What are we doing? What should you be thinking about when it comes
So,
to,
Rodney, you're telling me we're getting older. Is this what you're trying to say, right?
yeah, I fight it every day, but I am part of Generation X and I'm right at the cusp of Generation X and baby boomer. So this is near and dear to my heart. And it's fascinating, Vernā, because people, as I said, are living longer, but they're also choosing to work longer. So one of
Yeah.
the fastest growing demographics in the workplace today, people over the age of 75. Now, they only comprise less than 2% of the workforce. So I don't want you to think that you have all these folks rushing back into the workforce or having never left the workforce, but they are going back to work. They're saying, hey, listen, I'm healthy, I'm vibrant, I enjoy earning my own living. Let me go do that. But they want to do it on their own terms. So that's really what we
Yeah.
talked about at the UN.
We're going to get more into this about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But one of the things that I have often said to people who are like, yeah, I don't know what it's like to be in like a marginalized group or to be treated differently because of who I am. And I'm like, just wait a while, right? Because if you're lucky and you get to cross over into the older category, you're going to know what it feels like to be stereotyped and underappreciated and seen as like obsolete. And it's just a matter of time. Now, ultimately, I think because there's so many people getting older, hopefully some of that will shift because people will actually have examples,
Right.
counter examples, which is always an important aspect of breaking through bias, right? Is to like,
Hmm.
okay, let's remember that we actually have examples that are counter to the stereotypes that we keep. But it is an interesting way for people who haven't had a chance to think from that point of view to actually experience it.
Oh, absolutely. You bring up a wonderful point in that if you have never been part of a marginalized group, that will happen someday as you get older. There will be certain folks who will make assumptions as to your capabilities solely
Yes,
based on nothing else but your age. And guess
your
what?
age.
As a marginalized person, we deal with that all the time,
It's true.
but for different
And
reasons.
truth be told, people have this experience when they're younger because people think, oh, you couldn't possibly know, or you're not as wise, or you don't seem like a lawyer, or any of those things because people have a picture. Descriptive bias is what we call it of what competence looks like, what wisdom looks like. And often young folks aren't given the respect either. So it's on either side of that age spectrum.
It really is. There was a great survey earlier this year from intelligent.com of hiring managers. And what was shocking is that a number of hiring managers in the survey said that they were less likely to hire someone right out of college, even if they were qualified, simply because of the assumption that it was just going to take them a longer time to get acclimated to being in a work environment. And that kind of made me sad because listen, those folks, just like everyone else, they have things that they can contribute to your workforce. And simply because they haven't been in work culture and may not understand the culture, and every company has different culture,
Yes.
you're going to say, okay, you've never been in a work environment, work culture, we're not going to hire you. I'm going to go with this other person who's just as qualified, but they have been in a work culture. To me, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, it's the same point about access to opportunity. If I don't get the opportunity, I'm never going to be the person who has work
Right.
experience. But
Exactly.
let me ask you this question. So you came into this role very recently. Tell me something about your background, how you got involved in finance, period, and like why this was an interesting role for you, both from the personal side of things and the professional side of things.
Sure. So I have been in the financial services industry for over 35 years. I started out, so coming out of college, I actually did not want to go into finance. I was going to be a radio DJ.
I can see
And
that. I can see that.
you
I'm
know?
feeling it right now.
Exactly. Loved R&B music. That was my passion. But I got a job offer from one of those easy listening stations doing the overnight shift. And then I got a job offer from a mutual fund company working in their money market fund portfolio division. And I had student loans, Renee. I said,
I hear you.
I'm going to go make some money for a while. Maybe I'll come back to radio. But then what happened is in October 1986, 87, we had Black Friday, which was the biggest one-day drop in the market since the great crash back in 1929. And what fascinated me was even if you were not directly invested in the market, it still had an impact via your retirement plan or something, or your company's pension, because people still had pensions back then. So I said, wow, this is an industry that impacts everyone. And that got me hooked. So stayed in financial
Ah.
services. Now, how I transitioned from that side of the business to benefits was a fluke. What
Mhm.
happened was I was working in private wealth management, dealing with folks who had significant wealth, managing financial advisors. And I got a call from a commercial bank saying, hey, we're looking for a branch manager to come and manage a branch in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Now, I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I knew East Flatbush, Brooklyn was just like the neighborhood where I grew up in East New York, where it's working class. And it was the opportunity to go back home, per se. And I said, yeah, this sounds great. So I went there and saw folks that were very resistant to banking
Mhm.
with this particular institution because they thought it just wasn't for them. And I said, why not? They said, well, I come for a loan and I get denied. I said, let's talk about that. Let me understand that. And what I would find out is that they didn't understand about credit. So I would hear things like, I don't understand why I got denied because I have a 620 credit score.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's actually just fair. But they thought it was a great credit score because everyone they knew had a credit score like 550. So comparatively speaking, they thought, hey, that's a good credit score. So then I realized
Yeah.
that there was that financial literacy gap. So that's how I got started in workplace benefits is as I was going out, I started volunteering to go to churches. I would go to Thursday night Bible studies and Saturday morning prayer meetings and just talk about financial management. And because of that, when the institution I was working at, when they started a workplace financial wellness program that they would provide to employers, they asked me to manage the sales team for it. And so that was over 20 years ago. And I've been in that space ever since until this most recent role, which came about because one of the things I always believed in is whenever you talk to employers and clients, and even talking to employees, in order to get your point across, you lead with data. You give
Mhm.
them some background. So I've always
Mhm.
been passionate about research. I was a poli sci major in college, so never did anything in the research field, but I always enjoyed taking a look and identifying some of those nuances. Okay, this says this percentage of people want this, but this other percentage, but this other group, this other demographic wants that. Why is that? What happened? What's the reason behind that? Because I'd always been passionate about that, I've always been asked to, for 10 years now, to work on research projects until finally they say, let's just make that your job. Let's just, you're
I
so
love
passionate
that.
about it. Let's just make it your job.
I love that for so many reasons. First of all, I know that the people in the church basement really appreciated that. And I am so grateful when churches are bringing in people to give individuals an understanding of finances and financial literacy. It is so important. And so thank you for sowing all of those seeds. It's so important, right? That's the one place where we are willing to give our money. And it's so important that people really understand that because there's so much charitable giving,
Hmm.
and it is still not, people also still don't quite understand a lot about what they're doing and
Right.
how they can become wealthy and how to do that. And these people are working so hard. So thank you for that. I also was a poli sci major. But what I also love about your story is how your passion and the thing you chose to be involved in, even though it may not have been your day job, ultimately made space for your day job. And so I love when that happens. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful for everything that you are doing and that you have done. And I'm wondering if you could tell us what you're learning from your research about what employers are thinking about nowadays when it comes to workplace benefits, and what, if anything, has changed over more recently.
Yeah, so Morgan Stanley at Work conducts an annual survey called the State of the Workplace Financial Benefits Survey, where we survey 1,000 employees, but we also survey 600 HR leaders. taking a look at what are some of the trends, what are they thinking about. And one of the things that we find commonality among employees and HR leaders is that HR leaders believe that their companies should ensure that they're offering best in class benefits. And guess
Yes.
what? Employees say the same thing. My company should be offering, but how they define what's best in class, that's where they differ.
Tell me that. Tell me more
Sure.
about that.
Sure. So what we find in many of our surveys is that when employers are saying we want to financially support our employees or provide benefits that help them in their financial lives, they're focused primarily on retirement. But in this day, especially with what's going on with inflation and everything, people are more focused on the day to day. So they're saying, hey, yeah, retirement is a big goal for me, but I want that support that helps me with my day to day financial management today. And this is why what's interesting is that we found that 9 out of 10 HR leaders said that the employees are coming to them with their financial complaints and saying, hey, I'm dealing with this, I'm dealing with this issue. And what's actually a little scary is that 8 out of 10 HR leaders that we surveyed said that employees have asked for support in the form of a workplace benefit that the company just doesn't offer.
Such
So,
as?
such as, I'm having difficulty saving for emergencies. Is there anything you can do around that? Oh, no, we're hearing things about emergency savings funds, but we haven't started one. Or big one, caregiving, especially when we talk about women in the workplace. Care, and also millennials who are in that squeeze where they have kids, but they also have aging parents. So they're saying, I need something about caregiving. And do you know that less than 15% of employers today offer some sort of caregiving support services? So those are just a couple of examples. Another big example that we find is that with things like when it comes to finances, financial planning, about 20% of employers offer some sort of either financial coaching or financial planning. But employees, what we have found in our surveys, we did a survey with Sherm that found that over 60% of employees said that they want personalized financial planning as a benefit.
Wow,
And
that's
yeah,
interesting. That's
yeah.
interesting.
And the thing is that here's why employers should be concerned, because 91% of employees said that if a job, another company offered the benefits that they need, they would be tempted to leave.
Yeah. And when people are concerned about their day to day, it also means that if there's a job that offers a bit more money,
Yes.
they are making decisions based on that, not necessarily some of the other, I think, important considerations for where's the best place to work. But I also do recognize that you're calling out, for example, gender and gender identity and how people have different experiences or expectations based on that.
Yes.
Also generation. And of course, I wanted to hear what you're thinking and noticing about the fact that the workplace has grown in diversity, right?
Hmm.
A lot of organizations are doing better in this area. They're
Right.
inviting in all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds, right?
Absolutely.
And we know that different groups have different needs and influenced or are touched by lots of different circumstances. So how do benefits flex to deal with the differences that people are bringing to their workplace?
Yeah, I'll take that in two parts. First, I'll talk about some of the differences that we see in the data among different demographics in the workplace. So let's take like what's keeping people up at night. So when we asked in our state of the workplace survey, okay, what's are the things that your most pressing financial issue today? For men and baby boomers, it
Yeah.
was retirement planning. For women, Gen Z and Gen X, budgeting. For millennials, it was financial goal setting. So each area, each when you go to the different governments, and then let's roll like race and ethnicity into that. Okay. In a different survey, we are one of the sponsors of the Employee Benefits Institute Workplace Wellness Survey, which is a survey of 1,500 workers around their mental, physical, and financial well-being, and specifically how benefits address them or don't. And what we found in that is that Hispanic workers are most likely to view their level of debt as a concern more than any other group. That's their concern. Black workers, when we talk about debt, guess what? Student loan debt. That's where the problem is. And that's understandable because, especially with Black women, have the highest average student loan debt out of any race, ethnicity, and gender. And there was one particular survey a couple of years ago that found, or study that found, that the average Black woman coming out of college has if you compare their first year salary to their level of student loan debt, their student loan debt is 111% of their first year salary. So even if no taxes was taken out, if they just took their whole paycheck and said, I'm just going to apply this to my student loan debt, still wouldn't be enough.
So that stress is so real. Having come
Yes.
out of law school, you have future earning potential, but in the meantime,
Right.
right? You're like, how am I gonna pay this bill?
Right.
And you have a whole nother mortgage. And at least I was in a situation where my ex-husband, he would say, okay, now if you go to the ATM, you need to write down what you spent the money on. That's how tight it was. Okay.
Yes.
Do you want a muffin? Or should you go to the grocery market and buy like 10 nasty muffins and take them to work? It was serious, but it's even worse for folks now.
Yes. And I just want to throw out a couple of other demographics. So Asian American Pacific Islander, this is a demographic that is often, when it comes to financial well-being, is often held up as this is the ideal. But what people don't realize is that Asian American Pacific Islander encompasses folks from over 26 different countries. And when you look at things like the wealth gap in this country, which comes from a survey that comes out every 3 years ago, Survey of Consumer Finances from the Federal Reserve. So for the first time this year, because in most government surveys, they lump AAPI into the other category. So they do white, Black, other. This year, they were able to break out AAPI wealth, Asian American wealth specifically. And what they found is that the median wealth of Asian Americans was more than the wealth of Black, white, and Hispanics combined. But remember, that's median wealth. So when you look at deeper into the figures, what you find is that country of origin comes into play. Mm-hmm. So Indian Americans have the highest income out of AAPI Americans. Mm-hmm. 2.3 Asian Americans are living in poverty today. 2.3 million, I should say, are living in poverty today. So when employers say we don't need any of these benefits because we have a primarily Asian workforce, and they seem to be doing no. Understand country of origin, what's their background. Asian Americans have the biggest intra-wealth gap out of any ethnicity.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Burmese Americans make on average 40,000. Indian Americans 120,000.
Yeah, that's a huge gap.
Exactly. Is your workforce Burmese or is it Indian Americans? Yes.
That's real. And thank goodness for the fact that the research is getting better and the diversity within these groups is being explored, because it's a very different situation. You might say that about people of Latin heritage as well.
I'm glad you said that. So, little preview. Had the privilege of working on a new survey that we're going to be coming out with shortly on Hispanic wealth. And unlike most surveys, we didn't treat it as a monolith. We actually dug in and asked, what was your country of origin? Are you foreign born or were you born in the US? And then we disaggregated that data to take a look. And there were some interesting findings, like depending on country of origin, you were more likely to use a financial advisor or less likely. Depending on country of origin, you were more likely to own your own business or less likely. So it's going to be something. It should be coming out in a month or two. But yeah, that was so fascinating to just read. And as you can tell, I love data. So I'm digging into the data, like, wow, over here, and what percent, and why is it Dominican Americans this, but Cuban Americans is this, and so all sorts of additional questions started coming as to other things we can explore.
And thank goodness you're doing it, because this is an example of how someone's background and identity helps them to be, in some cases, a much better researcher, because you're asking questions and looking in spaces and areas that folks who may not have had that experience or thought about the world through various lenses, they might actually not know that we need to dig more deeply. So thank you for doing that, because I think what employers how this could be helpful to employers is to think about what equity looks like when it comes to benefits. And I know that people get very confused about that word. And even I'm not even more than confused, fearful. But I do think that what are we doing if we're not trying to get to equity? Because the only way we get to equality is by rectifying the tilt, as some people say. And so I wanted to just ask you a little bit about that. For companies that say that they are committed to DEI, what does that look like when it comes to workplace benefits that are financial?
It looks like understanding the financial journey of your employees and how their identity may have come into play. So let me give you a couple things to think about. You know how every year they have the Take Your Kids to Work Day? So one of my colleagues, she brought her two teens to work. And I found out both had summer jobs. Oh, great. And she said, yeah. And their first paycheck, we go and we deposit into a Roth IRA. And so I'm giving that meme Kevin Hart look like with my head tilted. Say what? Because I don't know many people who are doing that.
I
So
don't know many people who know what a Roth IRA
IRAs.
is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Acknowledging that not everyone's at the same starting place. Not everyone has that financial knowledge. We did a survey of diverse high earners, folks who had household incomes of 100,000 and more, and we oversampled for Black, Hispanic, and Asian American high earners. And what we found is that overall, across all race and ethnicities, only about 50% said that finances were taught in their household or talked about. But
Mm.
for Black and Hispanics, that was a lower number where it just was not talked about. It was not discussed. It was a taboo. And think about what people learn in school. So, according to the Council on Economic Education, today, and this is only recent, 35 states now mandate that a personal finance course be taken in high school as part of as part of your high school graduation requirement. But many of those states only started in the past couple of years, passed that law. So, how many folks went to high school more than 10 years ago that this was not part? So, people aren't learning it at home, aren't learning it at school. And then we have historical differences where people view finances. So, let me tell you about my household. You know what I learned about debt, Vernā, in my household?
Don't get it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Don't
Debt,
don't
don't
get
get it.
in debt. Pay cash for everything.
Exactly. Don't get in debt. So, guess what? My parents never bought a home, which is one of the ways to build wealth. Investing, that's gambling.
Yeah.
Don't do that. This is all this comes into play around equity, understanding and benefits that when you're going out to employees and saying, hey, you should contribute to your retirement plan. Okay, I got to select investments. What's that? I don't understand. How do I do that? Do I like
Yes.
close my eyes and go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which is what some people do? Or
Yes.
or they look at historical return and say, okay, I'm just going to pick the one that has the highest 5-year return.
Yes. And I also think that some of us are saying, if I put my money there, what if something happens in my family? There's an emergency. I'm the one. A lot of people are the one
One.
in their
Hmm.
family that is not living paycheck to paycheck, maybe has a little bit. And so do you put that in some future situation and not be able to actually deal with some of, like you said, the day to day?
Right.
Or like, how do I manage that? And also, how should I trust these people? Because they seem like crooks. Like, you can
That
tell
is
me,
what
and
we
it's not.
found, Vernā. That is what we found is that when we looked at trust in financial institutions, it was fascinating. So one of the things we found, because we asked, okay, who do you trust most? Like wealth management firm, credit union. I forgot what some of the others were. Hispanic and Asian Americans said credit union is who they trust the most, rather than a wealth management firm. And that made sense to me. I remember others saying, I don't understand that. I said, think about a credit union. It's a neighborhood institution. They probably have folks that are speaking their native tongue. And that's why there's that level of trust.
Yeah,
But what was
absolutely.
interesting, even though because of his history and finance, and especially when we had the black respondents, of course, they had higher levels of distrust. But what they said is, how you can gain my trust is not by having necessarily a black face in front of me, but having someone that respected my journey and
Yes.
understood my journey.
Look, I was one time talking to a financial institution about bias, and I was explaining to them that women have been so disrespected
Hmm.
in when it comes to investing that there would be situations where there had been a long-term relationship with a family but was really with the husband, and when the husband passed, the wife went looking for new representation because
Right.
she had never been included. She
Hmm.
had never been, no one had ever looked in her eyes when they were meeting with, no one had asked anything about her. In other words, they felt disrespected and were going to go and look for someone who they thought cared about them, respected them, would not look down on them. And that's a
Absolutely.
real loss for business if you don't understand and can't relate.
It is. And think about what's being called the great wealth transfer. So, over the next 20 years, as the silent generation begins to pass away, baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials are going to inherit the greatest amount of wealth in history. And one of the things that we're seeing is that companies are starting to think about, how do I get to know that next generation? And women live longer on average than men. To your point, if I've never sat down, I've never had a conversation with the spouse in this case, and the spouse is a woman, and in this example, how can I then go, oh, sorry for your loss. By the way, can I continue managing your money?
Yeah. Exactly.
No.
Especially because, yeah, no, because you have choices now. So that's also really interesting. And one of the things that, by the way, I remember when I was building my company, this goes back to what advice we got growing up about debt. I hired a person who did not have that advice growing up to run my company. And she said, you need to get a line of credit. And I was like, oh, no, I don't. I financed this whole business without a line of credit. She goes, what? Who uses their own money to finance a company? And I was
uh,
like, what are you talking about? She goes, no, everybody knows you borrow money. You use other people's money to
right.
build a business. And it took
Yes.
her, months to convince me to get a line of credit. And she goes, no, and then you pay it back. And then they like that you paid it back. And then they give you more money to use. What
I
world
know.
is this?
It's so back, I think it was 2016, 2017, the Kaufman Foundation came out with a business financing study and disaggregated the data across different race and ethnicity of business owners. And what they found is that Black business owners were less likely to apply for a loan, even though on paper they were shooing to get approved, because they just number one, like you said, don't go into debt. But number two, they also anticipated getting denied because of their race.
Interesting. So some people are getting denied, some people are not applying, and a lot of times they're not applying because they don't want to have debt or they think they're not going to get it. This is, I imagine, things you talk about when you speak to
Yes.
groups about financial literacy. And I wanted to hear more about what your advice is to families, to individuals, to people of all backgrounds, but in particular those who have been historically marginalized and excluded, but now might have more access and opportunity, but not sure what to do with it. And also just people who are in tough situations and are trying to bridge that wealth gap.
Yes. And it is an important conversation to have. So we are having it because what we find, especially with traditionally marginalized communities, is that when we look at those communities, more people, especially younger people within those communities, are interested in investing. But the Finra Foundation, according to a study that they did of investors, what they found is that Black and Hispanic investors were much more likely to only have started investing in the past 2 years, whereas white and Asian Americans over 10 years. And their source for information, primarily online, YouTube videos, rather than sitting down with
An
someone,
advisor.
an
Mhm.
advisor or something. So what I'd like to talk about is starting with the fundamentals, because that's important. Because I remember participated in a financial literacy fair in the Bronx for kids and their parents, South Bronx, 2 months ago. And great young man came over to me. He's age 13. I'm ready to invest. I want to get started. And I was like, okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the fundamentals. Do you have a savings account? No. Okay, here's why you need to start with a savings account before you jump to investing. You got to have that rainy day fund. So, talking about what I start with is talking about some of the fundamentals, setting financial goals. One of the things I love to talk about, I just talked about it to a group of our newly hired analysts today, is goal setting, financial goal setting, and doing it according to the SMART goal setting method, which I'm sure SMART being an acronym: specific, measurable, action oriented, realistic, and time bound. And it's amazing how many folks never even think about that. And when they set goals, they're not making it specific. They're saying, I want a home someday. Okay, great. How,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
yeah, so I start with, okay, let's dig into that. You want a home someday. Have you thought about how much you have or may be able to borrow? No, I've never looked into that. I just know I want a home. That's just like playing a game of darts without a dartboard, where what you're doing is throwing the dart in the air, which is your money, and going, I hope it lands on a home. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Define your
Oh,
dartboard. It has numbers on it. Okay, you hit here, it's this amount. You hit here, that's what you need to do. So that's where I begin talking, and then build from there. Once you have the fundamentals down, then we can start talking about taking it the next step and building wealth through investing.
well, the goal piece is so interesting. I don't know. I'm just a person who is goal oriented. It's actually sometimes a problem. But what I realize is if you don't have a specific goal in time and something, you also need, like you said, to be realistic and achievable. But you got to start somewhere. And if you don't, you just wishing. But what I also find is once you've articulated that goal, it's almost like magic because
Yes.
you're seeing the sneakers and you're like, those are cute, but I have a goal. And by
Right.
the end of this month, and by the end of the half year, or by the end of the year, I need to have put this much away. Therefore, I'm going to wait on the sneakers. That whole
You know,
delayed gratification is so important.
another thing that's important that you just brought to mind, something you said earlier, is how when we get the paycheck, it's the community paycheck or our family's paycheck, extended family's paycheck. Another thing we talk about, especially, we have an economic empowerment seminar for the Black community, and this is one particular section within that seminar, and I helped to create that internally, is how to say no.
I'm sure our listeners want to hear more.
Yes. Okay. So, several methods. One of the things that research, Mass Mutual did a study a couple of years ago and found that Black and Hispanic households are much more generous in giving, either to family, friends, or to charity. But sometimes that can impede you from your goal. So, coming up with some strategies, several strategies that we talk about. So, first, have a giving statement. So, meaning, okay, I will be giving only to my church. So when someone comes to you and says, hey, we're trying to save the whales, it's an important part of the environment, we're raising money, we'd like you to contribute. That's great. The environment's important, but my giving statement is to my church. Another way is use someone as a buffer. Say someone comes to you and says, I'm starting my business. And I know, Vernā, you got money and you could help me. And I need some seed capital. Hey, great. Congratulations. I remember when I started my own business. Great. But I'm working with a financial advisor and I have a financial plan in place. And I don't have everything's allocated to that financial plan. So I can't provide you with any funds, but I can provide you maybe with some contacts, an alternate solution, alternate offering. That's another
Yeah.
way that you can do it.
I love that because it's not personal. It helps people to recognize I would love to. And I also have to be accountable and responsible for my own life, for my family,
Exactly.
for the future. And I think that's really important. And I am wondering about how the workplace and employers can help in this regard. I know that one of the things that a few companies are doing, or a few financial institutions are doing, is like working with affinity groups or employee resource groups to go more directly to certain populations that have already
Mhm.
identified as a need this kind of information. Is that something that you are doing? And how would you invite other like leaders and employers who might have an opportunity to speak to someone in their benefits group and try to make this more possible?
Absolutely. I do it all the time. I speak to different affinity groups and deliver. Let me tell you, Black History Month is my busiest month with working with our corporate clients to all of their ERGs, their Black ERGs. But we have folks who go out and through every month, whether it's Pride Month or Hispanic Heritage Month. But yes, first, a couple things you need to do if you're an employer. You need to survey your employees around their financial wellness challenges and disaggregate that data by different demographics. Most employers only disaggregate employee survey data, possibly by income, pay levels, sometimes geography. Far fewer do it race, ethnicity, veteran status, level of disability. Then once you do that, work with your employee resource groups to validate that data because sometimes this data can be wonky. And maybe
Yeah.
you get it back and from the survey and they say, oh, our Asian American employee said this, our AAPI ERG. What do you think about that? Yes, but there are some nuances to that. It will help you understand. So I'll give you a great example of that. There was a company that decided, based upon feedback, to provide benefit communications in the native language of the employees. And the employees at this company had all mostly, in it was like a factory environment, they had mostly Spanish sounding last names. So Vernā, they translated it into Spanish and handed it out. Employees looked at them dumbfounded. You know
They're
why?
like, they don't speak
Because
Spanish.
they were Filipino. They spoke
Yes.
Tagalog. they, they were Filipino.
If you're going to do a survey, you might as well ask which language would be
Which
most helpful, right?
exactly, exactly. Yes, employee resource groups are so valuable because they give you that focus groups. Usually employee resource groups are made up of the most passionate employees that you
Yes.
have. And
Yes.
I've just seen such good work. One of the things we found in our high earner survey is that Black high earners were the most likely to say that they had a side business in addition to their regular employment. So I was reading last year about a particular tech company that their Black employee network had an entrepreneur week where they invited in entrepreneurs to talk to their entrepreneurial employees. So most companies would be
Yes.
like, "Oh, you have a side. I'm not gonna get involved with that. I don't want you to do that." They actually encourage their employees and help their employees to then sell their products on that because this particular tech company sells things on the site, and so that may give a hint. But they actually invited their employees and show them, okay, how you become a vendor of the company.
That's awesome. I know
Yeah.
at Netflix for Juneteenth, we used to have an event where not only did we have people who were external vendors, but people, like you said, who were employees and had the side hustle. Sadly, or maybe not so sadly, this is like where people do their creative work
Yes.
often. Some employers were probably afraid, oh no, if this business goes so well, they're going to
Exactly. I'm
leave
gonna
us.
lose them. Right.
But that's fine because they're where they should be. And they're thrilled that you are the kind of employer that will help them. And that also
Hmm.
increases a lot of loyalty. But also, I think that we don't hold back people.
No.
When you believe in them, you want to see them do their best.
And here's another thing that I would throw out for businesses. You see your employees are entrepreneurial. There is a term I'm sure you heard, entrepreneur. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a person who works within a company to come up with additional products and services. So they act like an entrepreneur, but they work as an entrepreneur within the company.
Yes.
Tap into that entrepreneurial spirit, assign that person, hey, we're thinking about branching out into this market. So we want you to take a look, do some research, we'll give you the support and build the product.
Yeah. That's
Tap into that.
exciting.
And it's especially can be done with baby boomers. The majority of business owners, small business owners today, Renee, in this country are baby boomers. So as they age and sell those businesses, they may still want to work, as we talked about people working longer. Imagine you take that person who's ran a business, successful business for 30 years, has sold it, but still wants to keep their hands and maybe have a flexible work agreement. Bringing that person in to train your staff, to provide that insight. And another place where older workers have a role is machine learning, artificial intelligence. With artificial intelligence, it has to have some sort of learning base. all of that knowledge that
Yes.
the person who's
Institutional, often.
exactly, exactly. Being able to utilize that older worker to provide that knowledge, to provide that testing and say, you know what, that seemed good on paper, but let me tell you when we practice it, why it didn't work.
Yeah. I can see some employers thinking, okay, benefits, that's expensive. And shouldn't those people be working anyway, not doing other things? But what's the upside of employers really focused on getting the benefits right and thinking well about this?
I alluded to one earlier where 91% of employees would be interested in accepting a new work opportunity if they don't get the benefits that they want. But also, what we found in our state of the workplace financial benefit surveys that 89% said that they would feel more invested in staying at their company if the company provided the benefit that met their specific needs.
Yeah.
So it's expensive to recruit. Turnover is one of the most costly line items for any particular company. And this is why so many companies are focused on trying to stem that turnover. But it's also why in this environment, companies are cost cutting, they're cutting back either in people or in benefits. But what was interesting is that when we asked them in the Employee Benefit Research Institute survey, another survey we support with them, the Employer Financial Wellbeing Survey, where we ask employers about benefits, the benefit that they're not cutting back and actually increasing
No.
financial well-being related benefits. What we found is that 7 out of 10 said that they're going to increase their budget for financial well-being benefits, and another 3 said it won't change. So no one said decrease. 100% said either it's going to increase or it's not going to change. No one said decrease with that particular benefit. That's how valuable companies, and that's really, earlier you asked about what's changed over the years. What's changed is that companies are finally recognizing that the depth and breadth as to how they have to go about with benefits. Another thing that's starting to change, I'll mention, is companies finally realizing that one size fits all benefit communications does not work. Everyone has a different way that they would like to learn about their benefits. What we have found in the EBRI and Employee Benefit Research Institute Workplace Wellness Survey, older generations want a one-to-one counselor, benefit counselor, sit down and talk. Younger generations, they either want a video or they want a group session. Everyone, and then there are nuances within that. So we didn't talk about intersectionality, and this is something that is important for employers to think about, is that we all show up with a number of different identities. And so it's important when you think about benefits to think about that and understand that, how to interweave them. And this is why oftentimes what we find is that where there's that cross-sectionality among different demographics and identities, we actually get folks to join sessions and realize, wow, I didn't realize that as a disabled veteran, this is something that you're dealing with, but as a neurodiverse person, I'm dealing with that as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because this seems to be another area where a lot of employers are expanding their understanding disability and
Mhm.
neurodiversity. What have you noticed in those categories?
You're starting to see, yeah, more employers talk about how to meet the needs of neurodivergent individuals. Up to 33% of the population today is neurodivergent, depending on how you define it. If you include ADHD, Asperger's, autism,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if you include the full list from the National Institute of Health, about 33%. So employers, what they're starting to realize, hey, certain things we may need to make adjustments on. Maybe it's the lighting in our room because
Yes.
may
Or like the spacing,
yes,
like, yes.
exactly.
Yeah, in some cases with neurodiversity, people just, I cannot have people behind me, or I can't,
Right.
I need more space. It's going to really cause us to think about what are the conditions necessary for people to really operate at their highest level. And it's
Absolutely.
not easy. But that also means, I also was thinking about mental health. That's definitely become an
Oh,
area, right?
yes, we are seeing so much around mental health and the intersectionality of mental health and financial
Yes.
health because they go
Hmm.
hand in hand. And what we have found is that workers are saying that financial stress is having an impact on both their work productivity and their at home life, both. And fascinating. So I mentioned the survey we did with Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM. we asked about that intersectionality of financial well-being and mental health. And even though what we found is that the majority said yes, if they're going through financial stress, but only less than 10% said that they had sought help either from a financial advisor for the financial impact, for the mental health impact that their financial troubles they were going through, or a mental health professional. And this is why one of the fields, and we were just talking about this on a call yesterday at the Employee Benefit Research Institute, we were talking about financial therapy. That's a field that's
Wow.
growing. So financial therapists will sit down and work with you. Many of them are certified therapists, but they also have things like certified financial planning designation. So they will sit down and work with you on, okay, let's start from the beginning. Similar to Lay on the Couch, tell me about your upbringing. Same
Yes.
sort of thing. Tell me about your first remembrance of your relationship with money. How did you learn? And understanding some of those motivations, because you can take the best budget in the world, Vernā. You can do everything. I'm setting my goals. They're smart goals. I'm doing all this. But if you don't understand that you are thrown off track when you get depressed because you spend, and you use spending as a way to combat your depression.
What do we call that? Retail therapy. Before
Retail
we knew
therapy.
it was a real
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad to hear that that is happening. And I'm wondering about where are the resources? A lot of times people don't go to a therapist or they don't go to a financial planner. First of all, they're like, financial planner, I don't have enough money for a planner. Or I don't know how to even find them. And then I don't know if they're going to cheat me or whatever. So where do people go for the resources?
So I would say start with your employer. So we are
Okay.
seeing more employers are offering some sort of financial counseling and coaching, whether
Okay.
it's an actual certified financial planner, maybe it's a debt counselor, maybe it's through your employee assistance program. We have found that in our research that employees constantly are saying they don't know what their firm offers when it comes to benefits.
Hmm.
And more importantly, what we found in our state of the workplace survey, the majority of employees said that we believe that the employer has a responsibility to help us better understand how to navigate our benefits. And part of that is, where do I go for financial counseling? Oh, you didn't know that because you are participating in our equity compensation program that you get to talk to a financial counselor? No. Why? Because no one told me. No
Hmm.
one communicated that to. So that's the first place. The other thing is, of course, there are many. If you're living in major cities, many cities have offices of financial empowerment, especially in underserved communities. These are free counseling services where they will work with you to get your financial house in order. If you're not getting it from your employer, there are potential government agencies that actually help you with that. Reach out, look on your city's website. Office of Financial Empowerment is typically what they're called. There might be some variation on that. And of course, there are not for profit organizations that do the same thing. Operation Hope is one that's done a lot of great good within the communities that they serve by offering that financial coaching.
And then I know for sure that the YW actually also does some of this.
Yes.
And as you said, your church, it may be in the basement, but I know more churches are trying to do that. I just wanted to ask you a few more questions just about the union movement, right? So there are a number of for-profit companies that have seen their employees go the way of union, and maybe it's all their employees, maybe some of their, or actually maybe it's just that kind of frontline job or whatever, where unions are just part of how it works. What's sort of the differences, maybe, or things that people should be aware of if they are in the union space?
Sure. The Bureau of Labor Statistics came out last year with an employee benefit study or survey. And what they found is that union workers were more likely to have access to things like retirement benefits and employee assistance program than non-union workers were. But they were less likely to have access to paid family leave benefits, flexible work schedule, and flexible workplace. What I would say is that understand, what you get as a union worker. Make sure if you are a union worker and if you're a non-union worker, do the same thing through your employer. Being in a union, a lot of it's done through collective bargaining. So there is a give and take, which is possibly one of the reasons why you see less flexibility but also union workers, as you noted, tend to be frontline workers. So that might have to do. So if you're a person that says, no, I actually need a flexible work schedule, or I need a flexible workplace, meaning I need to be able to work I need to be able to work remote periodically, understand how that comes into play if you are entering a workplace that is unionized.
Awesome. I know we touched on disability, but this is an area where I am really working and trying to learn more and be more more aware and less, and really just uncovering the ways in which my ableism is like front and center a lot. So I did want to talk about just that. For example, if you are a person with maybe even a physical disability or whatever, are there financial kind of benefits that companies are offering? We also have people, very different category, but similar things, who are like working outside of the workplace, or they're hybrid, right? So they're in sometimes and they're out at other times. So that includes people with disabilities who, when COVID came, a number of people I know with physical disabilities were like, hey, I really like my house. It works for me. I've outfitted it. I don't want to come back to the workplace, actually.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit more about disability and how that's being handled benefits wise. And it doesn't have to be just physical, obviously, but
Yeah, the thing with disability is employers are starting to understand that it goes beyond, as you said, the seen disability. It's the unseen disabilities, and understand that they have to take that into account when having benefits. From an employee perspective, though, what I will say is that know and explore what your employer offers before you get to that point. Here's one of the things, and as you mentioned up top, I'm chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council at the Employee Benefit Research Institute. One of the researchers there issued was a study on retirees and disability. And what they found is that Black and Hispanic retirees were more likely to have to stop working earlier due to a disability, and much more likely to have been unprepared for that happening. Knowing as you're getting older that some things might happen, and once again, maybe you always be healthy. You want to start thinking about how long, if I had to stop working at 62 versus 67 or 70, am I prepared to do that? And if not, talk to your employer about how you can get prepared. Find out what sort of resources. Make sure that you have the right insurance in place. Many people don't have, either they have the very base disability insurance from their employer, but they don't go beyond that, because it's like, hey, I have this disability insurance, but calculate, will that cover you during your period of disability, or do you need to supplement that? So that's what I would say on
and
the
you know how
employees.
insurance companies are. I'm
Yes.
sorry, but I just have to say this. They're just
No,
going to
right.
find a way not to pay you. They
Right.
were like, are you disabled for this long and you can't do this and you can't do that?
Yes.
And you're like, the bottom line is I can't work. You can't
Right.
make money.
Exactly. 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 So yeah, absolutely. And the unseen disabilities, find out about accommodations. So we talked about neurodivergent individuals and working in certain type of environment, maybe not too close to people, maybe not certain, if there's loud sounds, if there's harsh lighting, make your voice known. And that's what I say to employees all the time. Make it known to your employer, because they're not going to, a lot of employers are not going to ask those questions. We are finding more are asking those questions and coming to that realization. And that's because of the research that we put out. That's because of the research that others within the industry are putting out and saying, hey, this is a group that's being ignored and you need to pay attention.
Yeah.
AARP has a great body of research around workforce and disability.
Awesome. Awesome. And yeah, my experience is not only won't they ask, they don't know how to ask, they're afraid to ask, and they also can be quite insensitive. They just don't know. It's one of those areas that we all need to learn a lot more about. And so I'm just grateful that there is research and people are learning more.
Even in our State of the Workplace Financial Benefits Survey, what we found is something, I believe it's like a quarter of employees said that they've never thought to ask their employers for what type of benefit help they can have when it comes to their personal finances. Just never occurred to them.
Yeah. Yeah, because we have that strict line between our
Yes, exactly.
we used to anyway, and now we're
Right.
realizing, oh no, that's a person, and this wall is porous, and people are their lives are here too. So I'm so
Absolutely.
grateful again for all that you're doing and the ways that you've enlightened us during this time. And is there anything you want to just leave us with, advice or just an observation or reflection that you want to share with us?
Sure. I'll say from both the employee and the employer perspective. From the employer perspective, what I encourage employers to do is to identify through a financial wellness assessment or financial wellness measurement what are the specific challenges of your employees and disaggregate that data across a wide range of demographics: geography, income, race, ethnicity, gender, veteran status, level of disability, because the results may surprise you. And
Yeah,
from
and
the
also responsibilities, right? Childcare
Yes,
and health and elder care. Yeah, all of those.
absolutely. Especially like you said, childcare and elder care. Hispanic women are most likely to be unpaid caregivers in this country. So if you have, there was one employer that actually did that. They rolled out caregiving support services. And remember, I said 15% of employers offer caregiver support, but they rolled out new ones and they specifically went to the Hispanic ERG, knowing that. So that's on the employer side. And on the employee side, don't hesitate to reach out and ask your employer for help. Let them know, hey, I'm struggling. I need help in this particular area. Because odds are, if that's happening to you, that's happening to others as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Rodney. You are so wonderful and so informative. I feel like
Thank
I
you.
know a lot more now, and I'm hoping our listeners do too. And if you're in a position of a leader and you're in an organization where you have influence, please take an opportunity to speak to your benefits people and share what you learned here. Maybe you want to share the podcast. And if you know someone who's in your family or who is a colleague that could benefit from this, please share this podcast with them as well. And like I said, when we publish it, we will make sure to share as many resources as we can that Rodney provides for us. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Rodney.
Thank you, Renee.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to follow me at Vernā Myers on Instagram and Twitter. You can also listen to my podcast on Spotify and Apple Music. Subscribe to my channel and share this episode with someone who is going to join us in this space. Make sure to visit my website for DEI resources and online learning courses at vernamyers.com. And make sure you sign up for my newsletter to stay in touch with me. Thank you again for listening, and see you next time for more Sundays with Vernā.